Tuesday, April 23rd. Thank you for coming to City Hall. I'm joined by Honorable Council Members Jose Huizar and Mitchell Englander. As you can tell, the acoustics are not the greatest in this room. So if you need to have conversations, please take it outside. We would truly appreciate your cooperation there. There are several items today on the agenda. And let's see if we can get through some of the consent and continuances. Two on consent. You're very quick, Councilman Englander. I think I know where we're going now. Item 3 was for consent, but now it's called special, I think, because of cards. Do you have 3 as special? Okay. 4, can we move on consent? Seeing no cards on 4. Have a first or a second on that? We'll move 4 on consent. 5 will continue. Do we have a date for continuance on number 5?
Mr. Chair, it's May 28th.
Okay. So continue that item to May 28th. 6, we can move on consent. See no cards. Do we have a first on that? Do we have a second? Okay, we'll move 6 on consent. 7. We do have 1 card on 7, otherwise it would be on consent. Mr. Dillinger, you're supporting this. Do you feel compelled to speak? Because we're ready to act on this. I'm not asking you to speak now, but...
Okay, I don't need to speak if it's...
Okay, you're a smart man, because you're on consent. Okay. So that being the case, can move in second? Okay. So it takes care of 7. 8, we can continue in plum to May 7th, and council May 15th. And 3, are we sure we want that on special? Item 3, because that was on consent. Okay. Want to just come on up for the technical correction on number 3, so we could take care of that?
Shauna Bonson, City Planning Department. Yes, just a technical correction asked by the applicant. The Planning Department is amenable to it. This is a correction for condition number 11, Public Access Harbor Regional Park. The last clause, in lieu of being tied to the B permit, to just read, prior to the issuance of any certificate of occupancy, the Department of Building and Safety, the improvements agreed to shall be specifically constructed by the applicant and have been completed or guaranteed.
Okay, so with that recommendation and changes, we can move that item. Have a second on that? Okay, so moved. That'll be ordered this committee. So, going to do the director's report now before we get to items 1 and 2.
Great. There's no report today. If you like, we can go on to the other items. I do not have a director's report today. If you'd like, we can move on to your other items.
Okay. I will start over there for a second.
I'll be doing enough speaking in just a minute.
Okay. All right. Okay, so let's go to item 1. Got a staff report on that?
Good afternoon. Deputy City Attorney Amy Brothers. We're here today because the court has ordered the city to set aside and reconsider its grant of 3 variances and an adjustment for a 3rd unit at 1100 to 1102 Stearns. And let me just give you some background on that. The property, 1100 1102 Stearns, is in an R1 zone. The property has a duplex and a rec room in the back. The properties in the area are pretty much all single-family dwellings. Back in the 1980s, the property was rezoned along with the rest of the neighborhood to R2. The duplex is a non-conforming use. The property owners received an order to comply, asking them to convert the rec room, which they had been using illegally as a dwelling unit, back to rec room purposes. The owners decided to then apply for a variance to legalize the rec room as a dwelling unit. The zoning administrator denied the request for the variance, making negative findings on all 5 of the required findings for a variance. The Area Planning Commission upheld the zoning administrator on appeal, also agreeing that the findings for variances could not be given for this particular unit. Nonetheless, the council member for the area asked the council to assert jurisdiction over the matter pursuant to 245 of our charter. The council did so, and the council granted the 3 variances and adjustment in order to legalize a 3rd unit in the backyard of this property. Neighbors filed a lawsuit against the city and the owners of this property and challenged the grant of the variance, and the court agreed with the neighbors and said there was not substantial evidence in the record to support the grant of the variances. In particular, the judge focused on 2 of the findings. The city council had said that there was a hardship here that could be rectified by giving the variance. And specifically, the city council said, if we did not give the variance, the city would lose a rental unit, and that was a hardship for the city. The city also said that by granting the variance, the tenant at the rec room would be able to stay in her living quarters. The judge said, legally speaking, that is not a hardship. The hardship has to be to the property owner. The hardship has to be with regard to some economic issues that the property owner will have if they don't get a variance. A hardship to the city does not qualify. A hardship for the tenant does not qualify. The judge also found fault with the city's findings on the 3rd element, which is that special circumstances and practical difficulties existed such that a variance was needed for enjoyment of a substantial right that other properties in the area had. And the judge said this is absolutely not supported by the evidence. No other property had received variances to legalize a 3rd unit in the backyard. And most of the other properties were single-family zones. So the judge also faulted the city council on that score. I did want to read the last paragraph that the judge inserted into the court's opinion, which is, the court notes that some city council members made eloquent and compelling statements about the need for the city to preserve and increase its housing stock. These laudable public policy goals, however, may not be used by the city council to dismantle the city's zoning scheme in a piecemeal fashion. Now, philosophically, there are 2 decisions the Plum could recommend today. One is to set aside the determination and go back to the APC finding. Philosophically, the council could say, let's set aside the city council determination and then try and make positive findings on this. Practically speaking, based on the facts in the record, right now, there is only one way for the city council to go. And I ask and recommend that the city council, Plum, recommend that the city council set aside its determination, granting the 3 variances and the adjustment to legalize the dwelling unit, the rec room as a dwelling unit at 1102 Stearns, and adopt the Central Area Planning Commission findings and determination denying the 3 variances and the adjustment.
Any questions of my colleagues on this? Any questions? Any questions? Okay. So we'll go through the speaker cards and we'll come back to you. Valerie Sachs and Sean Bayless. Come on up.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Council members. Valerie Sachs, Sachs Real Estate Consulting on behalf of petitioners, the Chasnovs. We're here mostly because we weren't sure exactly what was going to happen today. We do concur with the City Attorney's recommendation. We do not believe that there is any that are already facts that would support the granting of the variances and the adjustments, which we've maintained all along. Just a couple points. I think the City Attorney said that it was rezoned in the 1980s. Sounded like she said to the R2 zone. It was actually from R2 to R1. I think that was probably just a slip of the tongue. Just to sort of add a little bit, the judge specifically said that it was an abuse of discretion with respect to both the variance and adjustment, and that 2 of the variance findings and 2 of the adjustment findings could not be made based upon those facts. He did not reach the other arguments because they were not, his decision on those counts was dispositive. And finally, he did emphasize that the City Council cannot consider any evidence that was not submitted before the zoning administrator. Insofar as there may have been later submitted evidence which may have swayed the City Council, that is not something that, as a matter of law, can be considered. So the zoning administrator carefully considered all of the evidence before her. The Area Planning Commission also carefully considered all the evidence that was before that body, and we believe that those decisions denying the variances and adjustments were correct, and we respectfully ask that you make that recommendation to that effect to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, can you just identify yourself and who you represent?
Valerie Sachs, Sachs Real Estate Consulting, actually Valerie Sachs, Attorney at Law. I wear both hats on behalf of petitioners, the Chasnovs.
Okay, thank you. Sean Bayless?
Sean Bayless, Councilman Paul Corrett's office. Our office supports the City Attorney's recommendation to go ahead and set aside the previous council decision and to adopt the previous Central Area Planning Commission decision, which was to deny the requests.
Okay, thank you. Question?
Thank you. Can I ask a question of the City Attorney? Where's these? We approve a number of variances that come through this committee, and legally we are supposed to meet certain elements to provide that variance. I often find how loose it is and how broad we interpret us meeting those different elements to provide variances. I wouldn't be surprised that if there are more challenges to the city in terms of when we approve individual projects on variances, that we would lose more of these. I don't know if we need to go in closed session or not, but I think this is something that's worthy of further discussion to talk about our overall approach to variances in the city. I believe this could lead us to greater liability in the future. I don't think we take these variances as seriously as we could. Hardly anybody ever challenges us after this in court. But either just want to, if you could share your thoughts on that, since you see this perspective from the legal side and from the policy side, Mr. Chair, I think this is something worthy of discussion for the future for this committee as to how are we processing variances, and is it something we should pay more attention to in the future?
Deputy City Attorney Amy Brothers, I will say that the most recent published decision we've received on variances came out right about the time that council was considering this matter pursuant to 245, and that other case is the West Chandler case. And I know that City Council is aware of that. That is a temple that is being proposed for construction in the valley. That was a variance case, and the court found that the city did not follow our variance procedures under 1227 and overturned the grants that the City Council had given. So that is just a starting point. That the West Chandler case came out about a year and a half ago. So I think, council member, that your concerns are very valid, and that we are seeing the tide turn on this.
Yeah, Deputy City Attorney Ken Fong. I just wanted to add, I agree with everything that Amy said. And we've tried to advise both the Planning Department and the various council offices on the need to really have good findings when you do make a variance. But, and I think I've probably told this committee before, but I'll just repeat it a little bit so that you understand why it's difficult to make a variance. Because when you're making a variance, you're making an exception to your zoning code. And there's a long line of cases saying, you know, we don't want city councils and cities just arbitrarily making exceptions to their own code. If they want to change the code, they should change the code. And so that's really, you know, most times a lot of times that would be the proper procedure. If you want to do something that's not allowed by the zoning now, you change the zoning. And if you do it through a variance that is not supported by adequate findings, then, you know, you always risk it being overturned later, even if you get it approved now. So that's sort of the long view that you have to take with respect to variances. So, you know, in our office, you know, we will work with planning. You know, we've given classes and education to the planners on how to make findings for variances, and we realize there's a lot of new planners. We'll continue to do that because I think it's very important to be proactive and get it right, you know, on the front end, so we don't have a lot of cases like this.
And if I may follow up here, our code sets up a great deference towards the zoning administrator findings on a variance. And the code requires that if anybody, whether it be the area planning commissions, city planning commission, city council, if those bodies want to overturn a ZA determination on a variance, that body needs to make specific findings on how the zoning administrator erred. It's not enough to simply say, we're making these findings over here. The findings need to specifically address each one of the ZA findings and say how the ZA erred. And that right there is a very difficult standard for any of the reviewing bodies.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you for those questions, Councilmember. Well, we do have a recommendation in front of us, and the directive, and I want to make sure the staff is very clear on the direction here, but it is to approve the city attorney recommendation to set aside and reconsider the council's October 4th, 2011 determination, granting of 3 variances and an adjustment to legalize a recreation room as a dwelling unit at 1100 through 1102 Stearns Drive, in light of the Superior Court's writ. Would that be accurate? Anything else?
If you wouldn't mind, council member, I'd love to repeat it. I believe that the commission is saying that they'd like to recommend City Council set aside its previous determination granting the three variances and adjustment to legalize the rec room at 1102 Stearns, and recommend that City Council adopt the City Area Planning Commission findings and determination denying the three variances and adjustment.
Okay. So that is what's in front of the committee. That'll be a motion. Can I have a second on that?
Second.
Okay, so we'll move on that item as prescribed by our staff. That'll be the action of this committee. That takes care of most items. Roberto, what's next?
The sole item remaining is item 2, Councilman, which is the joint report to realign planning and building and safety.
So I see we have screens up. We have any popcorn? Okay. Director.
Good afternoon, council members. Michael LeGrand, Director of Planning. Along with me is Bud Overham from the Department of Building and Safety, and we're here to present our joint recommendation on the realignment of city services to functionally integrate development functions into a Department of City Planning and Development Services. We're very excited to come talk to you about this topic today. It's something dear to my heart and dear to the city's constituents. For many years, over 20 years, there's been discussion about development services and how can we better deliver services within the planning field, as well as everything from vision to implementation. How can we realize a city that not only takes our general plan to the next level, but also makes sure that our customers have a streamlined process, that we can compete with other cities around us, and that we're able to provide a framework to make sure that all the city departments aren't operating separately, but are marching to the same beat. One of the report before you today makes a recommendation that's very bold, but that is based off of over 20 years of experience from different reports from over the years that have looked at the items of development services, how to enhance the development process, and how to deliver better service to our constituents and our communities. Starting back in the Garcia report a number of years ago, there's bold recommendations in that report to do functional integrations, combine departments to realize a development process that was world-class. The next iteration came from a proposal called 12-2, where there was a discussion about combining departments to reduce overlapping functions, to have a clear authority of the departments involved in the planning and permitting process, to be able to reduce the overlaps and the silo mentality in many of these departments. Over the last 3 years, each of the departments involved in development reform have made significant strides in their individual departments, whether it's the permitting process of building and safety, the work on B permits in the Bureau of Engineering, or the comprehensive zone code reform that's been undertaken in the planning department. Each department really is doing a really good job of moving forward the development departments and moving forward project review. The problem still becomes, even though each department is doing a good job, we're doing it in our own silos. We're doing it under our own mission. There's not the common theme, not the common lens, and not the common leadership provided to have a holistic approach to moving projects not only through the process, but making sure we're asking the right questions, making sure we invite the community down to a public hearing, they're coming down for the right discussion, that we're looking at the right issues in the field, that the conditions being put on a project from our zoning administrators are actually enforceable in the field, that cross-pollination between planners, building inspectors, the engineer bureaus, our policy wonks, that all of that kind of conversation is taking place rather than done throughout each individual department and never having a holistic touch. We're dealing with a 1946 zoning code. We're in the process of updating that zoning code to be a lot more functional and to match today's Los Angeles. One of the things that this report recommends is creating a process that would also mimic that new zoning code, that would allow for the city to compete with other cities. I have stories and anecdotes all across the city of applicants who trudge through our development process. They come to me, I talked to one applicant who had a project in Venice, for example, 275 square foot addition to a single family house. They had over 20 clearances from various city departments for one single family home addition. Within that, 5 of them were from my own department. Many of those would have never had to be put on the plans. And it wasn't any fault of the plan checker. It wasn't the fault of the planner at the counter. It's really a failure in the system to look at the perspective of the customer having to navigate through the process, the cost of the process. Instead, we have a very, very difficult system of checks and balances that in the end doesn't really protect the public interest, but asks the wrong questions and also makes sure that it's a very expensive process and a closed process to keep investment in Los Angeles, as well as rather than having our departments focus on the big picture and how to move the city forward in a sustainable, a more pedestrian-friendly manner, we're focused on the nuts and bolts, the clearances, the items that we're looking at that are really in the weeds, and the time to step back and look at the big picture is often lost because we're sitting there with these mechanical systems that many of which were developed in the 1980s and have never holistically been brought together. One of the benefits of looking at consolidation in the city of Los Angeles, we have some of the best engineers in the city working in the Department of Building and Safety, the Bureau of Engineering, some of the best engineers in the nation, some of the best planners in the nation working in the Department of City Planning. We have a very, very talented workforce. The difficulty is a lot of the areas we put people in, we have them focus on a single issue rather than looking at the entirety of the project. The proposal before you creates a structure that allows the staff to think big. It allows them to own a project, to have leadership in that project, and make sure that any of the bottlenecks that come, they're able to solve within their own jurisdiction. It empowers the staff members at our public counters to make decisions, the people acting on the cases to make decisions, so that we don't have to always check with another agency, and those problems have to be solved through multiple agencies, many times coming to the council office for your leadership to get us involved in the projects, going down to the executive offices. This will empower the staff and also create the management mechanism to hold one department accountable, have performance measures, and real true implementation. As we rolled this report out, we heard from many stakeholders across the city, whether it was various neighborhood councils, council members, as well as organizations such as Central City Association and VICA. And one of the keys to this is their cooperation in this and helping us identify the problem correctly, that this isn't simply moving people, moving departments together, but creating real fundamental changes in process, our procedures, how we look at projects, how we solve problems, how we move the city forward, so that we're not wasting resources on duplicative functions, but reprogramming those people to be able to get our work out better, faster, and more accurate. I'd like Alan Bell to discuss some of the details of the presentation we have before you, but first, Bud Overham wanted to say a few words about his experience working on this, as well as some of his insights on other city government models he's experienced throughout his career.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Bud Overham, General Manager of the Building and Safety Department, and I do appreciate all the comments that Michael's made. I think he's covered this pretty thoroughly. You'll have some other presentations, and I'll be available also at the end to answer any questions you might have. But let me start by saying that one of the few advantages of being as old as I am is that I have been around to a lot of places and see a lot of things. This is actually the fifth city I have worked in. In all four of the prior cities where I worked, there was a consolidated development services department. Matter of fact, in three of those cities, as city manager, I created that Department of Development Services and merged those various functions. So on the one hand, this seems like a bold move for the city of Los Angeles. On the other hand, other cities have been doing this for decades. And so the model to look at is replicated throughout the state and throughout the nation. And we can quickly learn from the things that other cities have done right and the other things that cities have done wrong. You have before you today, I've seen as I've walked in here, letters from some of the various associations interested in this topic. I think the letters are all well articulated of the kinds of concerns, or the kinds of questions and points that they make, and I think they're all very worthy of your attention. What I would say is that I, based on my 42 years of professional experience, endorse this concept. I think this is the right direction to be moving. On anything big that you have to do in a place like the city of LA, the devil's in all the details. All these people have raised issues and details that we'll need to iron out in the months ahead. And what I would point out to you is that what this report is recommending is to take the time over the next 6 months to retain a consultant and work through all of the issues that you're going to hear received today, so that all of those questions by the employees, by our stakeholders, can be answered to yours and their satisfaction. But as the old saying goes, a journey of 1,000,000 miles starts with a single step. I think this is the right single step, and I urge you to move forward with it. And with that, I will be available to answer questions now or later on.
Thank you, Mr. Overham. Mr. Bell?
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Alan Bell, Deputy Director of the Planning Department. I'm now going to walk through the specifics of joint proposal from the Planning Department and Building and Safety. So, as Mike mentioned, the city has had a conversation about development reform that has really been going on for almost 20 years. Can we go to the third slide? So, the way I look at development reform, it really needs to be thought of as a three-legged stool. And if we can get to the slide, we'll be able to show that. So what are the three legs of development reform? The mayor's strategic plan outlines a path forward for enabling the city of Los Angeles to be the best place to live, work, and play. I use the metaphor of a three-legged stool because if any one leg is missing, then the foundation falls and is not steady. So what is the first leg? The first is what we call a certainty. It is a certain process of creating a vision that will enable us to all strive for the kind of Los Angeles that we all want and are trying to make sure that our development processes will be aligned forward that particular vision. How can we get to that particular vision? As Mike mentioned, it is to revise our woefully out-of-date zoning code, which dates back to the 1940s, and it is also to update our community plans. Our community plans detail the vision at the neighborhood level and at the community planning level, how we want the city to grow and how we want it to develop far into the future. So, updating our codes and updating our community plans will provide certainty. But who will benefit from this certainty? Certainly, our neighborhoods will benefit from it because they will know what to expect, what our plans will lay out as a path for development, and certainly developers themselves will benefit from that enhanced certainty. The second fundamental leg of development reform is technology. Technological enhancements will make it easier for us to communicate with the public, make it easy for all the departments that have a say-so in development processing, that they will be able to communicate to each other. It will bring Los Angeles into the 21st century, enable us to compete in the global economy, and more importantly, it will facilitate transparent processes that will enable us to communicate with our customers, those who are doing business with the city, and all of the residents, all 3.8 million of them, of the city of Los Angeles. And then finally, the third leg of development reform is efficiency. And I think that the proposal before the committee today to realign all the common planning and development functions under one house, under one roof, with one centralized leadership, is about creating that kind of efficiency so that we can realize that vision, so that we can embrace technology in a way that we have never embraced it within the city of Los Angeles before. And I think that what that kind of efficiency will do is not only make us more competitive, but I think it will enable the planners and the engineers and the dedicated city employees to focus on what's most important. And I think what's most important is that vision for the city going into the future. And will enable developers who are also frustrated with the process, frustrated with the delays, frustrated with the red tape. It will enable them, too, to also focus on that vision and where we want to go forward as a city into the future. So, what are the realigned planning functions that are common functions? All of these is a first step. So the first two big items certainly are planning Department, and then also the Building and Safety Department. All of the current functions identified within the charter relative to planning would remain within the centralized department, and then the Department of Building and Safety would also be integrated into the new department. And then there are smaller pieces that are development related in three other departments. Department of Transportation. There has long been a desire to integrate long-range transportation planning to make sure that our codes and our plans align with how we are improving our streets, to make sure that we unify land use and transportation planning in a way that we haven't done before. Bureau of Engineering, which looks at street dedications and improvements, that would also be aligned under this particular proposal. And then also those staff within the fire department that actually inspect projects to make sure that they comply with our codes. So realignment of all these 5 planning and development functions. What can that do for our customers? Anyone doing business with the city and anyone who lives in the city. So certainly, I think a customer service approach is intended to try to put, may I have the next slide, please? Certainly a customer service approach is really intended to put a human face on this very big city bureaucracy. It is intended to make sure that anyone, whether at the very preliminary stages, they have an idea or a concept, they want to open up a business or they want to develop a large project. Small businesses in particular are often frustrated dealing with the city. So how can we make sure that we are building our small business capacity, which is really the economic engine for the city and the region? This is to try to provide that kind of advice that is currently being provided by our citywide case management office. But a customer service orientation, we take the hand of those who may be intimidated working with the departments, and we guide them A to Z, soup to nuts through the entire process. So one of the central components of this proposal is to have project managers that will provide that assistance from pre-development, just someone's idea about opening up a new business, to entitlements, getting all the permits that are necessary from all the different city bureaucracies, and getting a building permit issued, to what goes on in the field, inspection, making sure that the project is going to be compliant with the conditions of the building permit, and then once it's up, to make sure that they are in compliance with those codes and that we are, in fact, going to be enforcing the conditions that were granted in the first place. So what we think realignment of all these different planning functions will do is it will create a better approach to aligning our planning and development functions. May I have the next slide, please? So what are the characteristics of that particular approach? What are its key features? It's an all-inclusive approach, meaning that all the relevant stakeholders are involved. It is a clear process, meaning that it's transparent to anybody doing business with the city. It provides predictability where today we have confusion and uncertainty. It turns a face to the customer and it puts the customer at the central position in terms of doing business with the city. It is soup to nuts. It is project-oriented from the very beginning in terms of making an application with the department all the way through to getting a certificate of occupancy, and even when the use has been permitted and the building is constructed, to make sure that they are in compliance with those codes and processes. And then finally, undergirding all of this process is community input and making sure that community aspirations are realized. And this all relates to the first leg, which is to make sure that we have at the centrality in terms of development reform, realizing that this is all about implementing our community plans, our specific plans, and our general plans. So development reform. The kind of development reform that we are discussing today is certainly not a radical notion. It has been tried in cities both locally and nationally. So within Los Angeles County, what are some of the cities that have embraced this kind of consolidated approach? And you'll see that this is some of our competitor cities within Los Angeles County, from Long Beach, Santa Clarita, Pasadena, Burbank, Glendale, Santa Monica. They have all tried and tested out this particular consolidated approach. And on a nationwide comparison basis, such cities as Atlanta, San Diego, Seattle, Phoenix, Denver, Dallas, and Oakland, they also have tried this particular approach and have worked out precisely how all of these planning and permitting functions would be able to be integrated in a successful manner to advance their visions and their goals for their particular cities. So the benefits of a consolidated approach of aligning these common planning and development functions, there are numerous benefits that I think should be considered by this committee in terms of whether we should move forward with this particular approach. It makes sure that the zoning function, one of the things that is unique about Los Angeles and what I would call an only in Los Angeles approach, is that our zoning function is bifurcated between the planning department and by the Department of Building Safety. This would allow that particular function to be centralized for the first time within the city of Los Angeles. It would ensure that not only are we getting early zoning review of these projects that are being submitted to the department, but also plan check early review. We would be able to consolidate common administrative functions. We would make sure that we had a logical, seamless process that really treated each project at every phase, from concept and idea to entitlements, putting more flesh on the bones, all the way through getting a building permit and construction drawings that are submitted to the department. This would ensure far greater accountability and transparency, and we would be able to make sure that the department, in terms of holding ourselves accountable to our customers, the residents of Los Angeles, and anyone doing business with the city itself. So, as Mike mentioned and as Bud mentioned, this is a big undertaking, but this is an undertaking that has been under discussion and under development, again, for almost a generation. But this truly is a decisive moment in the history of development reform in the city of Los Angeles. What the two departments are recommending, though, is a thoughtful, deliberative process to making sure that we do this in a way the right way. May I have the next slide, please? So we are looking at a three-phase process as laid out within the department budget submitted by the mayor's office to the city council. The first phase would go into effect on July 1st of 2013, and that would result in the integration into the new department of the planning and development functions from the Department of Transportation, from the Department of Public Works, the Contract Administration section, and then also the Bureau of Engineering's Land Development Group, and then also the Fire Department. So that would be the first phase. The second phase is really where the heavy lifting would come into play. As Mike mentioned and as Bud mentioned, we're contemplating the services of a management consultant that would really focus on the how, if the council decides that this is the path forward for true, meaningful development reform. During that 6-month process, we would focus on answering the how. What is the most effective way to make sure that we are going to realize the promise of development reform? It is important during the 6-month planning and startup process to have significant, true, real, meaningful input from all of our stakeholders, from neighborhood councils and community groups to business associations, stakeholder groups, all across the city need to be involved. We need to listen to these stakeholder groups. We need to make sure that the department is going to be organized and structured in such a way that is going to enable us to make sure that we are putting first and foremost the needs of our customers. Again, anyone doing business with the city and any of the residents of Los Angeles. And then finally, if we do it right, on January 1st, 2014, we would have full implementation and realignment of these department functions. We would bring the Department of Building Safety into the fully consolidated, integrated new Department of City Planning and Development. So I now want to turn it over to Estine Marion, who's been one of the key leaders in the development reform effort. And there are 7 steps that we want to recite for the committee, 7 steps to go forward from here.
afternoon, council members. Estine Mayalian from the Planning Department. What I'd like to do is go over the 7 steps as has been outlined in your report. The first step is to attend meetings with industry organizations, Plan Check Neighborhood Council, and Chamber of Commerce to discuss the recommendation contained in the report, and also obtain feedback and consider suggestions from the groups. The second step is to direct the city administrative officer to retain a management consultant working with the director of planning
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
and the general.
Yes, one question, please.
I'm sorry.
Before you go on, you have a number of steps here, but I just want to make sure that we are clear on what part of this other timeline. So when you point out a step, the other one, some of them have dates. One of them has a date. So, for example, the first one, that would be when, in terms of timeline?
Mike LeGrand for the record. So the next steps, item number 1, meeting with the industry and the neighborhood councils would take place. It's been taking place prior to this. It would continue throughout the entirety of the process.
Prior to July 1st, 2013?
Correct. From now until even after we're restructured, it's kind of an ongoing commitment.
So that is April, May, June, really?
Correct.
May and June.
Continue it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. The second step is direct the city administrative officer to retain a management consultant to work with the director of planning and the general manager of Department of Building and Safety and their designee to develop a plan to fully integrate the planning and development functions recommended in the report, which considers the feedback from the development industry as described in step number 1 on or before January 1st, 2014. Step number 3 is to request the city administrative officer to conduct a financial analysis of fiscal and organizational impacts associated with departmental consolidation and assist in the development and administration of the budget and work programs accordingly. The fourth step is to instruct the personnel department and the city administrative officer to analyze necessary positions authority, job classifications, civil service requirements for new and transferred positions required to staff the consolidated new department. Step number 5, direct the Department of City Planning in coordination with the CAO's office, City Attorney's office, to prepare any and all code amendments, including but not limited to Chapter 1, Article 2, and Chapter 9, Articles 1 through 9 of the Municipal Code, to transfer all functions from the Department of Building and Safety to a new City Planning and Development Department. And step number 6, direct the Department of Building and Safety and other affected departments, as mentioned earlier, like Department of Transportation, Fire Department, Bureaus of Engineering, and Contract Administration, working in conjunction with the City Administrative Officer and the Department of City Planning to ensure a smooth transition of authority and work program, including preparation of documents to analyze current plan check and inspection workload, and all other specific tasks to be transferred and or consolidated. And finally, step number 7 is to direct the General Services Department to work with the Planning Department, the Department of Building and Safety, and other departments, as mentioned, in order to facilitate the relocation of staff into the new locations. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have quite a few public comments. Mr. Bell, is that it? Okay. We have a few public comment cards, so we'll start those. We have with us Edgar Kalatian, Scott Johnson, and Marion Dodge. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Never expect to be first. Edgar Kalatian, land use attorney with Paul Hastings, and I co-chair VICA's land use committee. VICA will have its own separate message, but I wanted to come here today and unequivocally support the consolidation plan. It's clear that the current system does not work. Over the last 10 years, as Mr. LeGrand and Mr. Over mentioned, there have been a number of Band-Aid fixes to fix the process. At some point, the process is so broken that Band-Aids are not enough. We're at a rare time where there's political momentum in the city to make a drastic change, to make a bold change. I have heard a lot of concerns in the community that this is moving too fast. That is not true. This is a concept plan. As Mr. LeGrand and Mr. Over and Mr. Bell mentioned, the devils are in the details. We must hold them accountable to ensure everything that was presented in the PowerPoint presentation happens. With appropriate management, with appropriate accountability, this is a great opportunity. Please take action on this today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, council members. My name is Scott Johnson. I'm an architect in Los Angeles. I'm founder and design partner of Johnson Fain, a firm here downtown. I wear two hats today. One is as a principal of Johnson Fain. We do planning, large scale. We interface with the planning department. We do design buildings of scale, and we interface with building and safety regularly. I want to give my strong support for this platform. We've tried many things and talked about many things over the years. I think the changes that are discussed earlier by Mr. Bell are the strongest platform for us to be productive, creative, and more efficient. So I'm in support of it. My second hat is I'm currently the president of the Los Angeles chapter of the American Institute of Architects, and because of some scheduling and some vetting necessarily, our letter is not ready yet, but you can expect within a matter of days a letter that will support this, and I know in that letter there will be a very serious invitation to, as you form this, to use my colleagues and my board and the AIA as a resource, an intellectual resource in helping to put this together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Marion Dodge. Then we'll have Sandy Brown, followed by Doug Arsenault.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Marion Dodge, president of the Federation of Hillside and Canyon Associations, representing 41 resident and homeowner associations spanning the Santa Monica Mountains. The Federation supports the concept of consolidating the departments of city planning and building and safety. Since many of the issues the Federation addresses deal with planning and building and safety, we think that a consolidation of the departments has the potential to bring greater efficiency to the operation. The important thing to remember is that the City Planning Department is the one that was created by city charter, and planning must come first and take the lead. The Federation looks forward to continuing to participate in the consolidation process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, council members, and good afternoon. My name is Doug Arson of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association. VICA supports in concept the City Department reorganization plan to streamline the development process. We have long advocated for a process such as this. We recognize the reorganization process is only in its initial stages. As this process moves forward, we hope the inclusion of VICA and its strategic partners in the design of the Department of Planning and Development's organizational structure. As our members must interact with city staff on a daily basis, we want to ensure that this process truly accomplishes its goal of simplifying the process. As stated in the April 5th Joint Departmental Report, while efficiency of the process is extremely important, the effectiveness of the process and quality of results is as important. We ask that implementation focus on the principles of accountability, better management of staff, and proper organizational authority structures. Too often our members are faced with unnecessary obstacles due to inefficiencies and lack of consistent procedures between staff members, particularly in regards to discretionary development approval and inspection. The current mix of good staff and bad staff is not acceptable. This reorganization must pull from the best of these departments. VICA looks forward to this process moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sandy Brown, followed by Holly Schroeder.
Good afternoon. I'm Sandy Brown. I'm with the Holmey Westwood Property Owners Association. I was going to talk about something else and support it. I still support it, but the words that I'm hearing really are quite alarming in that the steps that they were talking about was meeting with industry and the neighborhood councils, as well as feedback from the development industry. And I think the one thing that you've left out very seriously are the residents and the homeowner associations that work daily, volunteer daily to help their communities. I would certainly hope that that element and that group of people across the city gets to participate in this. It's very important because you know we will scream loud if you don't include us. So you have to. The other thing two things I want to suggest, and one is to get a citizens committee to work on this project and to stay abreast of what it is, and that it should be very open and really address all of the issues. That would be very helpful. And there's a preamble also that we support. The momentum is here. Get it going. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown, and thank you for that fair warning.
Good afternoon. Holly Schroeder with the Building Industry Association. We want to express our support for the framework that's outlined in the report. You should have received a letter from me that attached not one but two former letters about development reform and some specific items that we're interested in. The building industry really is where the rubber meets the road on this. I mean, this is how you take an idea from a concept of a landowner and planning and actually get something built that meets the vision that the city has. And so we want to be involved. We look forward to continuing to work with the general managers and the staff on working out those details. In our letter, we itemized a number of specific changes that we think naturally fall from this realignment, and some of them are very similar to the ones you saw Mr. Bell list on his slides. So looking forward to continuing to work together and looking for those specific results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Martha Cox, Tickman, Chuck Francois, I believe, Montage Development, and then Carol Schatz.
Martha Cox Nittigan, I'm with the Building Owners and Managers Association. I'm here today representing over 300 commercial office building owners to support the city's effort to realign a number of development functions within the new Department of City Planning and Development. This change has been a long time coming. We're heartened that there is a clear willingness by the departments to become more of a customer service oriented at a time when building owners are working hard to bring additional tenant companies to Los Angeles. We support the creation of an advisory group which will focus on the details of the transition and look forward to becoming an active participant. We do have some concerns, however. While the joint report outlines general organizational changes, it fails to provide many details, including an organization chart. Further, we want to ensure that projects currently under review not be slowed down during the realignment process. We look forward to working with the council and the department staff as the city takes this important step forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chuck Francoeur, Montage Development. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll be brief. Our firm, I individually, am strongly in favor of this proposal as presented. We're a small company. I don't have millions of people running around doing all the things to the city. I process every plan with the city. I process every plan check with the city. I deal with all of the submittals to planning. I deal with DOT, Bureau of Engineering, Contract Administration, every inspector that's out there. Very few cities have the fragmentation that I deal with here in the city of Los Angeles. I call it the Byzantine Empire. I understand it, but it's intimidating to most people. Everybody says, I hate the city of Los Angeles. I understand it, so I embrace it. I've gotten used to the pain and suffering. Essentially, what the planning department can, in conjunction with the building and safety integration, what they can do is they can streamline the process for not just me, but for the community and for the planning process. Best illustrative is what I'm currently doing right now in a housing subdivision up in Pacoima. To date, I've had to go to the Department of Building and Safety and deal with plan check engineers that get assigned to me for each successive phase that I'm building this 125-unit project. I've had to ask planning for 13 letters of clarification just to get through the process.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And you're still smiling. That's okay. Carol Schatz, Romero Malvo.
Carol Schatz, President of Central City Association. We represent a number of large and small businesses and a great number of people in the real estate industry. Development is where jobs and tax revenue are created, literally from the ground up. We support this realignment in concept, but we ask this committee, which has oversight, very important to this, to direct the departments to include the following specific recommendations so we know this is going to be done right and done with development reform as the context. We want the departments to specifically identify which processes can be eliminated or combined in order to reduce unnecessary layers of duplicative review. Second, we asked you to prioritize case processing by establishing reasonable time frames and allocating the right resources and staffing. Third, we'd like to see an organizational chart that identifies not only how the various roles will be restructured, but how the realigned functions will affect work. And fourth, and finally, it's critical that you maintain its commitment to long-term planning so that the zoning code, revision, and community plans are not put on yet another back burner.
Thank you, Ms. Schatz. Thank you very much. Romero Malvo, good to see you again.
Thank you.
you. Romero Melville, and I'm a resident of Los Angeles, a stakeholder in Leimert Park area. And I applaud the effort to try to streamline the development process. I just would urge that we not forget that a lot of what happens in building and safety is not development, and that a lot of the concerns that ordinary residents have come as a result of just changes to existing buildings. And I would hope that as the implementing language for this department takes place, that the mission of building and safety will be built into the overall structure of the department. And I also support the creation of an advisory group that will help the devil in his details. Thank you.
Again, I just want to take a moment, Ms. Malvo. I worked extensively with her, with the CRA, did great work and development throughout the city. So I just want to take a moment publicly to thank you, because it's one of the folks who kind of walked away in the sunset and weren't given a proper thank you. So I just want to take this moment to say that to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your hard work. Yes, give a round of applause, folks. Dolores Spears, Tina Hossein, and Shiharu Suzuki. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members, and thank you for this opportunity. In listening to the report on this merger in the 7 steps to proceed, nowhere in there is a meet and confer with the respective unions that represent the employees that will be affected by this merger. Our job is not to hinder the process, but to assure that there is a smooth transition by assuring that the rights of the employees that we represent are protected. We respectfully request that there is a meet and confer process prior to the implementation of this merger, and I would submit to you a suggestion that we form a working joint labor management committee to go through the processes and assure a smooth transition. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Tina Hossein, and I'm here representing the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce and our 1,600 members to acknowledge the important steps taken to increase efficiency, accountability, and certainty in the city's development process through the proposal of a new Department of City Planning and Development. I also want to encourage you to work with stakeholders such as the business groups here today to address critical issues relating to implementation of the proposed new department. As with any reorganization of this scope, the devil is in the details, which I think is a phrase you've heard often today. We seek to work with you to ensure inclusion of specific recommendations to improve the viability of the new department and ensure that its functions will promote job growth, economic development, and certainty for the business community. The Chamber's Land Use Council will be meeting tomorrow with Mr. Legrand and Mr. Avram tomorrow afternoon to provide key input on this proposal and establish a set of recommendations which we believe will move this new department forward to improve the business climate in this city. We will then be sharing the new set of recommendations with you all. And we thank you for your efforts to create a potentially visionary new department and look forward to working with you on its structure to stimulate economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Chiharu Suzuki. I work for the Building Safety Structural Plan Checkers. My only concern is that I do confirm and agree, and the idea for this concept is great for citizens of Los Angeles. I do hope that there is more ample time of having a public as well as an employee to have a more input into this. By listening to this 7 step, there is only 2 months involved of having an input. I suggest that we do have quite a lot more time to have that input before making a progress on decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next group of speakers, Lois Becker, Mark Stratton, Wendy Sue Rosen, and Don Frazier. You're welcome to come to the microphone if you like. Lois Becker.
Well, not
Mark
Lois
Stratton.
Becker, but Mark Stratton's going to go first. I'd like to read something that was that's written by the Brentwood Residents Coalition, which is a preamble that's been spoken about by other people that have made testimony. and it's basically a preamble that's based on the Planning Department's current mission statement. The preamble reads, in conformance with the city's general, community, and specific plans, the commission of the Department of City Planning and Development is to create, implement, and enforce policies, programs, and codes that realizes a vision of Los Angeles as a collection of healthy, safe, and sustainable communities and neighborhoods. The department strives to ensure that each community and neighborhood has a distinct sense of place based on a foundation of mobility, economic vitality, and improved quality of life for all of its residents. Relying on a timely and transparent processes, the department carries out the mission through ongoing and inclusive engagement with the city's diverse communities and neighborhoods. That's what we would like to see put above everything else, as a sort of a statement that shapes this new department.
Thank you, sir. Now, Lois Becker.
Yes, Lois Becker. Thank you. I'm here from Bel Air Skycrest, and I want to urge you to move this item forward on the condition that you adopt the mission statement / preamble that you just heard, which is submitted by the Brentwood Residents Coalition, and that a Citizens Advisory Committee be formed as part of the implementing ordinance to ensure that this is a well-balanced, well-integrated Department of City Planning and Development that includes protections for the residential community and not just greater convenience for developers. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Wendy Rosen. I'm representing the Brentwood Residents Coalition. The purpose of the proposed consolidation is to streamline land use and planning administration by eliminating procedural inefficacies and inefficiencies. This is consistent with the existing land use regulations that protect and promote healthy and sustainable neighborhoods and require transparent decision-making processes informed by robust public participation. To assure that the purpose of the consolidation is not misinterpreted, there must be a strong statutory preamble emphasizing that the newly aligned department's mission encompasses a commitment to eliminating procedural inefficiencies that inhibit development while maintaining the integrity of land use regulations that guarantee meaningful public input, transparent decisional processes, and neighborhood and community protections. We have proposed and submitted that language. You just heard it. We also ask that and it's modeled on the statement that already exists as mission statement. We also ask for an advisory committee. I want to make a last statement, and that is to say we're all here, the business community, the architectural community, VICA, and the residents. Please move this forward. We all need a shared understanding of this process moving forward.
Thank you. Don Frazio.
Councilman, thank you for this opportunity. I represent the chief officers of the Los Angeles Fire Department. And one of our objectives is to promote public safety. We do that by advising fire administrators, the electorate, the media, and the public. In general, we support development reform. However, in this case, we believe that this plan has been built in the very silos that they're trying to strike down. And I say that because fire has not been part of this equation, part of the development. If it had been, the developers of the proposal would have told you that state law gives, the Health and Safety Code gives fire department the responsibility and accountability for inspection under Health and Safety Code 13-145 and 13-146. Also, the city charter, section 130, gives the fire department responsibility for development inspection. We have a problem here because even if this plan is delayed, the mayor's budget transfers fire department inspection personnel to building and safety. And so I would ask that this plan be delayed, sent back for inclusion from all the stakeholders, that it's transparent like the government is supposed to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions, and it's pertaining to how we have moved on this process. That does end. Thank you, sir. That does end public comment. That does end public comment, so we'll close public comment now. When it comes to previous actions taken by this committee, by the different actions through different council motions, we have looked at coordinating a range of RFPs that speak to the technological aspects of this. When we look at the range of programs that have been funded or being considered for funding through building and safety and planning, can either department head share with us how you see the collapsing of this process with this restructuring of these organizations?
Yes, Mike LeGrand, Director of Planning. It's a very important piece of this is the technology component. Not only is it important to streamline and fine-tune our processes and the lens that we see those through, but also to have the front-end portal available to make sure that the digital age that we live in, people can access. So your mobile applications, being able to have a single tracking number, a single web portal for people to access information rather than having to travel to City Hall to see our determination letters, our files, our building permit clearances. All that type of implementation and that single web portal is part of an RFP process that's currently available, referred to as Build LA, that multiple city agencies have been working on for over a year now. In addition, combining our IT functions together gives us the opportunity to combine systems that currently track our permitting process with our entitlement process and give us data that we currently don't have available to us to be able to forecast trends, market conditions, affordable housing, as well as inspection and enforcement conditions, and align those with the goals we have for the various council districts. Currently, we have single operating systems that don't talk to each other. By having a single IT management of these functions, we'll be able to further integrate those functions prior to Build LA being realized and almost immediately upon coordination of these two functions together in one department. So again, that data and that knowledge will be able to be transferred into our policy planning as well as provided to council offices.
I do have other questions. I'd like to open up to my colleagues if there are any questions, observations. I do want to say, thank Councilman Englander for his motion that allowed for the legislative portion of this city process to take its role in creating the traction we have achieved thus far. So I want to thank you for that, Councilman Englander.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and for all of your hard work and leadership through this as well. This wasn't an idea that was just thought up out of the sky, obviously, and it wasn't the motion that came on the fly. As was discussed by the director, this has been a discussion for 20 years that people have been talking about, looking at realignment of services and customer service, technological components. Certainly 20 years ago when it was all a card-based system, as it's indicated in the report, some has changed, but the code has also, I think, quadrupled since then as well. But with that, I, in fact, before I ever even worked in this building, about 13 years ago, had met with then Mayor Hahn and talked to him about the idea of streamlining the process, that you have to jump through so many hoops, and in fact, that discussion was born out of a conversation that I had at that time at VICA, in fact, when I was meeting with and then very active and engaged back then with a lot of local organizations and advocacy groups and chambers and the like in my previous life. And this was a bone of contention, and it was a frustration amongst the customers of the city, the residents, the stakeholders, developers, etc. And it was right after the secession movement, in fact, when I was meeting with folks, some who testified today. I know Chuck, I don't know if he's still in the room, but he was part of one of those conversations, and many others, Sean Evenheim and others who came to me and said, well, what do we do? We don't even know who this Jim Hahn guy is. How do we even get a meeting with him, yet alone talk to him about some of these issues? And I said, well, let me see what I can do. And I actually set up a breakfast at that time with then Mayor Hahn and talked about the idea of forming a working group with expediters and developers and stakeholders to see if we can fix some of these issues and problems. That group continued to meet. In fact, our current mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, jumped on that as well and made a lot of strides and tried to do a lot of implementation and see what he could do to fix some of these issues, and continued, in fact, that development working group that continues to meet to this day. We recently had a meeting with some of them who were delighted to see how far this has gone. The idea of streamlining the process and the realignment, 12-2, which certainly came out of that movement, having a deputy mayor in charge of economic development and planning and processing certainly was born out of a lot of those initiatives as well. But with that, I couldn't be more pleased, quite frankly, with the report that came out. And hearing from what has come out from the stakeholders groups, the chambers, VICA, CCA, all the recommendations, the residents, the neighborhood councils. We don't want to be yelled at and shouted at, thank you. But we're from the city and we're here to help. And I think that's a mentality we have to take on and change the delivery of services and what we're doing today. It's critically important. And looking at some of the ideas that came out of this report and some of the challenges that were highlighted, the fact that it's complicated and time-consuming, exasperated by multiple levels of zoning requirements, prompted by the unique set of challenges that face each of the 66 communities of the city, the overabundance of information, regulations, exemptions, interpretations, requirements can be intimidating and discouraging. I mean, this reads on like a horror movie. Change in the city's culture from individualistic process possessive departments to a customer-driven, comprehensive citywide development process is necessary. It's critically necessary. If we're going to be a city of the future, if we're going to be a world-class city, we've got to be a friendly city in so many levels of development in terms of processes and customer service and technology and making sure we can streamline this process. And so going on in some of these recommendations, this whole renewed approach is very exciting, actually, to be part of this. It's historic. The fact that, and I want to applaud the mayor for recognizing this and putting this in his budget as well. And a lot of what both of our directors, both Mr. Legrand, Mr. Overham, need to be applauded as well for working together on delivering such a great comprehensive report. There's a lot more to be done. Now we've got the baseline of a roadmap to move forward. Sure, the T's need to be crossed, the I's need to be dotted. We need to have those stakeholder implementation roundtables because the devil's in the details. And we can get bogged down by trying to create, I think, I like the old saying, a camel is a horse created by committee. And so while we have to continue on a parallel track and move forward on this expeditiously, we have to have the output and the input from the various folks who are impacted and affected. By the way, including there's one other group that wasn't mentioned, and that's our current employees. The ones who are actually implementing this need to be brought into the fold as well as the people outside this building. The very people who are doing the work have to be part of the decision-making process and have a seat at the table because they are the experts. They are the ones frustrated as well and know full well what to do and what the recommendation should be. So now the only question that I have moving forward is how quickly can we move forward? Because this has been a long discussion for a very long time. I'm very excited about this idea of change, and it's not for change's sake. It's good public policy. It's a good process. I encourage the city, and it'll be a big part of the recommendations, whatever I support coming out of this committee, and I know there are a slew of recommendations, but is the input from all the folks that asked for it. That is so important in moving forward because we have the opportunity now to reshape and reform this process and the department and the functions. And we don't have a lot of opportunities or bites of the apple to do that. We have to do it right. We have to do it carefully with eyes wide open, with as much input from as many stakeholders as possible. It's critically important that we get this right. And we don't just tinker around the edges. So thank you for giving me the opportunity and the time, not only to learn a lot from you, Mr. Chairman, on this committee, but to serve on this committee and look forward to fixing our city and putting it back on track.
Thank you, Councilman Bloom. Councilman Woozer?
No, that's not a good lie.
Thank you.
Funny
And
feeling.
I too support this in concept, and obviously the devil's in the details, as a number of people have brought up. One of my first questions I had about this was, where was the fire department, the Department of Transportation, the Bureaus of Engineering and Contract Administration, and obviously they will be able to provide some input when this comes forward, and it's valuable, but those were some of my initial concerns. And my other concern was, not to rush to judgment, not to do it for the sake of realignment, but not really have a well-thought-out process. But it seems like a lot of those details that I've been looking for are actually coming up as we move through this process, and we set out a timeline to do that. What's important for me as well as input. I see that some of the next steps include meeting with various stakeholders and to get their input. I want to make sure that we not only meet with the development community, but also there's a step here for neighborhood councils to provide input and give some community input on how this would move forward. I think most neighborhood councils have a land use component to it, so they could provide that input through there. I would suggest, however, that at some point, given all the alignment, and I'm not sure how that may affect classifications or not of employees and employees in general, but this at some level should go through Personnel Committee, so I'm going to recommend that at some point this go through Personnel Committee. We could have that at some point in this process to look at those issues and ensure that, number one, we're not violating any employee rules, but secondly, to look at what the bodies moving around may look like. So I would hope that this could go through our Personnel Committee so we could look at those details. And that goes in conjunction with some of the recommendations proposed by the CCA. I wanted to walk through those 4 points because I see those are some along the lines of some of my thinking, to see if we could integrate those in some of the next steps as we move forward. One of their recommendations was to provide a proposed organizational chart, so that goes in line with looking at the employees and how do the bodies move around and who will be doing what and what classifications are created or eliminated or combined. I mean, those are some items that I think need a lot of detail, a lot of work to look at how that might move around. So on the first one that was proposed by the CCA, it says identify key process changes along with expected performance improvements supported by metrics and timelines. I would hope that could be incorporated at some point in the next steps. Streamlining case processing and ensuring current projects are not delayed, and provide proposed organizational chart and maintain commitment to long-term planning efforts. I'm particularly interested in the last point, where we have a number of community plans that have not been updated in years. And, we recently funded the Boyle Heights Community Plan, but that was after 2 years of fighting tooth and nail for funding each year in the budget. It shouldn't be like that. I mean, providing funding for community plans is one of the most fundamental things a planning department should be doing. And for us to have the processes we have and not thinking for the future, and the community plans give us a vehicle to do that, our master plan gives us a vehicle by which to do that, that's one of the most fundamental things our planning department should do. And so I think looking at our commitment to not just process entitlements, but really looking at our long-term vision for the city through our community plans and master planning, that we not forget those planning efforts as well. So I'm fine with, I support the concept, the detail, the devil's in detail, but I would hope we could incorporate the 4 points brought up by CCA, and also that at some point, I don't know what point, but at some point that this be given some time in the Personnel Committee of the City Council. I'd like to make those friendly amendments.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Before we, if I could, those should be wrapped into, and I agree with those, and we got a second already, but you've got my full support. That should be wrapped into the consultant's role in terms of, I believe what you brought up was personnel, the organizational chart, the streamlining of the case processing, the community plans, all of those recommendations, which, in having met with Carol and her staff as well, I fully support. Those should be part of the consultant's role, working with the director to come up with, as part of the implementation, breaking out the personnel, which I was going to suggest as well. That should be a function going back as we shift and have done through different transitions. We did it last year through the budget process with OPS. the Office of Public Safety and LAPD, all through the budget process, while the Personnel Department brings all of those issues back to budget for vetting, and it's in the context of the budget. So I absolutely agree, but just that it ensures it goes back to the right place for that to happen.
Okay.
And colleagues, out of courtesy to our first responders, we do have Chief Mark Storms here, so I will open up public comment for your presentation, sir. And if we can do that formally, then we'll close it after you speak.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Part of what I want to do is to make sure that, to get back to you like you directed, I believe 3 meetings ago, that we meet with Building and Safety and Planning to work together on this. And I'll tell you that the fire department supports development reform. We talk with our actions, not just with our words. You've just passed through public safety, through Plum, and through City Council, the adoption of the State Fire Code, which is a 7-year project we've been working on. In 1995, we met with Building and Safety to come up with development reform. We updated again in 2010. We are currently been directed by this committee to work with both Planning and Building and Safety on the plan. On March 7th, I put together a meeting with the General Manager of Planning, the General Manager of Building and Safety, and the General Manager of Fire Department, the fire department that's responsible for 10% of all plan checking and is responsible for all state fire marshal requirements within the city of Los Angeles, to discuss this issue. In that meeting on March 7th, the plan was done. There was no fire department input, no consideration for our responsibility of the state fire marshal, no consideration for the charter amendment, the charter that gives us the full power of the fire department for life, safety, and panic. In addition, in discussions with the state fire marshal today, she indicated she's willing to fly down here, speak to these committees on her behalf, but due to the short notice, I apologize on her behalf that she could not be here today. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, thank you. All right. I first want to thank the departments for the hard work. I know going back to 91 when the first discussions for collapsing these departments occurred, and given all the committee issues of who would chair what, and it kept blowing up year after year. We're finally here. I think what's critical is the fact that we can't lose time. But I think folding in this concern raised by the fire department right now is a very real issue. So understanding that the mayor released his budget, I believe, today, I understand that the budget discussions begin next week, that we could move this forward if my colleagues would support me. We can move the first 4 items so that we don't lose time. We don't lose time. We can actually have those actions moved upon so that they are in sync with the budget discussions. Allows us 1 week, I'd like to hold the remaining portions, 5 through 7, so that we can bring in one more opportunity to have the fire department and the other departments be part of the discussion so that we're ready for Tuesday for the remaining portion. Also, it gives me, and quite frankly, colleagues, gives me the opportunity to pay courtesy to the chair of the Department of Transportation in making sure he understands the impact of the departments and his oversight and his committee, which I have yet to do. I think that's an important gesture of respect. Secondly, now that it's on the public record, we're going to get probably more reactions from the different stakeholders. And I hope to move it next week so that we can get this moving forward. But if we can move the first 4 recommendations under next steps on page 19 or 20 of the report, that gives us the ability to not lose time. We can act on this next week, and we can move this forward and continue on the same timeline that allows us to move in an expeditious manner. You have a second on that? Okay.
What I would suggest is first just going through, if I could, since we're all on number 1 through 4, not that we're bifurcating or those, but just some changes on number 2. We're directing the CAO to retain a management consultant, and it actually should be the director of planning in consultation with the CAO. And the consultant's role also, it says to develop the plan. It actually should be to assist the department in the transition plan. Develop the transition plan, but to assist the department in the transition plan. With the stakeholders that were all mentioned in this meeting to be included in that transition plan. Those stakeholders being, once again, the business community, the residents, the neighborhood councils, as suggested by Mr. Huizar as well, and the industry, as outlined and as presented earlier, to be included in that process would be a friendly recommendation on that. On 3, with the CAOs to conduct a financial analysis of the fiscal and organizational impacts, I would say also to put that as part of the budget process. So that folds directly into, and it'll be a memo back through the budget deliberations that'll go back directly to the committee on the fiscal and organizational impacts, which will be part of the budget discussions anyway, but we can have a separate memo done on the CAO on that. I would suggest that we group 1 through 5 together then, if there was a recommendation out of courtesy for you as a chair, and I think the courtesy thing goes a long way, and it's critically important to have the dialogue and work with the other committee chairs as well on 6 and 7. 5 is a timing issue in having and looking at this further, because we're actually, I just got, as we're meeting now, the budget agenda just came out, and next week this item is up on the agenda, in fact. And so a lot of the preparation, working with the city attorney's office to look at the code amendments and the shift in responsibilities as it relates to the charter, and all of those efforts should actually start quickly, since that's going to be on the agenda next week. The 6 and 7 you discussed, I concur, and think that that courtesy and timing, particularly in light of what the fire department brought forward, should be recognized, and I absolutely would support that if that were accepted.
Yes, I would take that as a friendly amendment. Michael or Bud, when we talk about the RFPs and the timeline for the contracts of all the products that are expected to impact our technology and unifying our systems, do we have the capacity to have a report back with a timeline as prescribed by the different contracts? So we can see a listing of all the contracts. We can see when these products are being promoted, and we can follow the timeline so that as we move on these products, that there is alignment with personnel, there's alignment with function. And, wishful thinking would be that this is all going to flow in a seamless fashion and some sense of synchronicity, but reality gives us another truth. So I'd like to see a listing of all these products and the dollars attached to them.
Yes, sir. Bud over from Building and Safety Department. Yes, sir. We can do that. We can do that by, if you have this on your next agenda, we can have that back to you before then. The RFP on the Build LA went out. I think there was a request for a time extension, so the responses aren't due back yet, but I can give you a breakdown. By the time of your next meeting, I can give you a breakdown of those contracts. And again, I don't believe anything you're doing here will in any way impede to Build LA. I think to Build LA is on its track and moving very well. I think if anything, this will help it, but definitely not hurt it.
And I think
I'll bring you back the full report.
To me, it just enhances transparency. And Councilman, how many products do we have out there?
Can you repeat that?
How many products do we have expected through the planning department that allows us to streamline processes as you've described?
We have a number of ordinances that have recently been adopted, as well as our comprehensive update of the zoning code, which has been transmitted to the mayor for signature for the contract. So we're very close to executing the contract to begin the work on the zoning code. On the technology side, we've been holding off. We have some minor enhancements we've been doing to PCTS, as well as we can report back working with the Bureau of Engineering. Gary Lee Moore mentioned to me this morning some enhancements they're doing to navigate LA, so we can coordinate a timeline to show you all the work going on to kind of create that new digital face for the existing departments, as well as this newly conceived work effort.
Does Bureau of Engineering have any products that they're working on that you are aware of?
Correct. They're doing some enhancements to Navigate LA to make it a more user-friendly and capable system. But again, these are all going to be able to dovetail in the new build LA, but each of us are continually reinvested into our current infrastructure to make sure we can keep up with the needs of our constituents. But I'd be happy to include that report back with Bureau of Engineering, working with them before our
Well,
next
if we could
meeting.
have the city engineer give us a report, the notion of expediency does rely heavily on how we impact private property, but also how B permits affect development. And it's been my experience that the B permit process alone can be a major obstacle at times. And I know previous discussion tells us that maybe we can't tackle the B permit process yet, but perhaps as we phase in the private side, and as discussed in other meetings, we begin to look at B permit processes as well.
Yeah, this again is a framework that can be added over time after this model shows success. I have had conversation with Gary Lee Moore, and he's dedicated to making improvements, working with the development community on the B permit process, and working with us through the case management process to help provide a kind of an ombudsman role, to be able to provide a clear face to coordinate the work effort going on in the various bureaus through the B permits. So that can happen simultaneously as this goes forward, and I'd be happy to coordinate with Gary on coming back to speak to you about that.
The fair assumption would be then that whatever they are doing to upgrade their systems could in the future link up with whatever structure is created from this dialogue that will hopefully evolve by next year.
Correct. All of our IT managers are in constant communication. They actually have lunch meetings and monthly meetings about the enhancements going on in the various departments, and so that would be continuing, and we can report back on that.
Okay.
Just as a quick comment on that, in layman speak, this is what I heard. I heard, just from that conversation of technology, is that like right now, if I order something online on FedEx or UPS, it sends you a tracking number, and then like every 5 minutes you get an email, it's on the truck, it just passed this street, it's almost at your house, it's at your door. I mean, it's just crazy. Can you imagine a city where you filled out an application for something? I mean, all the stuff we're talking about is good industry speak, but at the end of the day, it's really about the customer service experience for everything that you guys are engaged in and have to deal with, and to move the city forward. So I imagine getting a tracking number on an email on any kind of application or land use development project that you're working on, no matter what that is, whether it's you're waiting for an inspector because you got a new dishwasher at Sears, which I'm still waiting for my inspector because I did get a new dishwasher at Sears, but that's another story. Or you're adding onto your home, or you're building an apartment building or a skyscraper downtown, that you have one case number with one point of contact, and they have a backup, and you're getting emails, oh, this was just signed off on. Oh, this was just approved. It's over at this department now. That's, I think, what I just heard, and that you want to hear exactly what's going on and how it's coming back, and it's going to work together.
Well, absolutely. It's unfortunately, we invest in the past in other departments large amounts of dollars, and then we see it didn't work, that something was not connected or something was left out, and then we end up regretting the resources that were spent and time wasted. So I just want to get ahead of that curve by folding in these issues and then move into that direction over time. So Roberto, if you can help me with the language and how we can move this.
Mr. Chair, before we do that, I just want to make sure that there's 4 items from CCA, we're integrating them into requesting directly from the management consultant to report on those items. And on the Personnel Committee, my suggestion, you're suggesting, Mr. Englander, that
Department go back to Budget and Finance as an instruction,
So we-
with laying all of that out.
but we lay that out
Those
through the
concerns.
Budget and Finance Committee. But I'm just wondering if they're going to have all the actual policy issues related to and legal issues. Sometimes
Right, so it would be then
We look at the numbers
for the
only.
Budget Committee to get consultation from the Personnel Department.
Okay.
Because that's who's going to deal with it ultimately, is the Department of Personnel, and along with the City Attorney.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay,
So
Mr. CLA.
So it appears, committee members, that you're moving recommendations 1 through 5, in addition to Mr. Weezar's recommendation to include the concerns from CCA. I think there were 4 concerns, and also to refer this issue to the Budget Committee, since they'll be considering this as part of the budget process, and also per Mr. Weezar to the Personnel Committee, in as much as it has impacts on position authorities.
And a report back on the range of contracts and products.
Right. I think that the second component was items 6 and 7. You were going to keep those in plum, and I think you said next week you would hold or consider rather the issue of the RFP on the status update on Build LA, and also the issue of BOE and the B permits.
Right, for 6 and 7 as a report back. Okay.
With one clarification, I believe, or 2 clarifications on that. One is that on number 2, it was, instead of to develop a plan, it was going to be to develop an implementation plan. And it wasn't to, for this, under the direction and the recommendation, it's stated right now the city administrative officer, so it should be the planning department in consultation with the CAO. And then on the personnel issues, as it relates to transitions and positions, as they relate to the various functions that need to be studied and vetted, as per Mr. Weezar, which I absolutely concur and agree with, not referred to committee, but referred to the Personnel Department along with the City Attorney to report back to the Budget Finance Committee as part of that process. Since those transfer functions were already outlined in the budget, we need to have the Personnel Department and the City Attorney report back to the Budget Department on each one of those positions, as I understood it.
Okay, are we on the same page? Looks like we are. So the Directions Committee, as stated by our CLA, given the amendments and the recommendations and report backs, and that'll be the action of this committee. Okay. Anything else on the agenda?
Public comment?
Anybody here for public comment? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.